Yeah, and it's always weird because people think it's starting to cool down. Why would we have so many hurricanes? But this is when the water temperatures are at their warmest in the Atlantic, and you tend to get the calmest wind shear in the Atlantic. We might start to see cold fronts up here, which is not always a good thing, as we saw with Helene. Sometimes interaction with these fronts and tropical systems are what really causes a lot of problems, can cause them to stall, can cause them to linger, can actually help pull them into the United States. If you get a trough, sometimes it pulls it back to the west. So yeah, it is a lot of anniversaries, and one of the big ones obviously this week we've been talking a lot about, Tim, has been Katrina, and it'll be 20 years ago tomorrow that the storm made landfall on the Gulf Coast. But today is kind of a crucial kind of part of the timeline for us 20 years ago, because I was actually on the air in New Orleans. Now, in complete transparency, people was like, were you working there? Well, how does this work? Even people at my station were kind of confused, like, why was I working down there? I was actually here at WCNC for 2.5 years, but I went back to help out my former station and our sister station. So it just happened to be I had worked there, and it's also our sister station. And tomorrow we're doing a 2-hour special on this. We talked to John Gum. The whole reason I went down there was they were short-staffed, and of the only 2 meteorologists they had, one of them's wife was going into labor. And so they were going to be down to 1. So on this date 20 years ago, it was just me and Carl Ardon, only 2 meteorologists at the station, and we were tag teaming at this moment on the air, Tim, and it was crazy. We have a video here in a minute, but I want to also talk about something else that came out today that was kind of instrumental in the storm, and it's this statement, and Jeb's got it punched up. So I don't know if you remember reading this or you've read it after the fact, but this was authored by a Weather Service employee, Robert Ricks Jr., which I know personally. I knew him very well at the Slidell office. In fact, I'm still friends with him on Facebook. He was commenting on my post about this. But just read this message that he put out, and this was kind of rare at the time, obviously, for the Weather Service. I'll just read a couple things about it, but it says, Hurricane Katrina, the most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength, rivaling the intensity of Hurricane Camille in 1969. And that was crucial because if you lived on the Gulf Coast, Camille is one of only 3 Category 5 storms to ever hit the U.S. Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks or longer, and at least half of well-constructed homes will have roofs and wall failure. All gabled roofs will fail, leaving those homes severely damaged or destroyed. Some of the wording in here, Tim, is kind of alarming, but it actually ended up being pretty true to what happened. And I think at the time this was somewhat controversial that the Weather Service would put a statement like this out, but this has actually been a template that has been reused. In fact, a similar one was issued for Helene last year from the GSP office. So what are your thoughts on this PNS, we call it, and do you remember reading this or reading it after the fact?
Yeah, I definitely remember it, and I kind of remember the same reaction that I can only imagine what you were feeling in the weather office when you got this. But just to answer your question, I think it points to a couple of things. We talk a lot about being forecasters, but really as meteorologists, we're communicators. And in this case, they were signaling, I think, to the public, but also to the broadcasters, hey, this is what we're expecting. This is kind of the urgency we want you to get out there. When you can compare it to another disaster that people know about or their grandparents talk about, or like a generational storm, in that case, Camille down there that does something, when you can pinpoint the exact impacts that are probably going to happen, and they're that jaw-dropping to half the homes are going to lose their roofs. Like, those are 2 things that really just, kind of stop you in your tracks. Yeah. And you brought up with Helene last year, they did issue a statement that had catastrophic flooding will rival the flood of, I believe it was 1915 or 16, right?
Yep.
I think part of the problem is that anybody alive in Western North Carolina, they don't remember that. That's a plaque on the wall. So those are differences, but similarities. What were you thinking when you saw this come down in real time?
I think it was just the realization that I think for me, we kind of knew, but I think for a lot of the anchors and the news employees, because we read this on the air, I remember reading it live, and the look on their face was like, I think it was when it finally hit them, like, wow, this is real. This is not a drill. This is not, because one of the things about Katrina that I think if you watch some of the documentaries, which there's a couple of them out there right now, New Orleans, and I have worked down there, people didn't evacuate for storms because there had been so many that had been near misses. And you heard this a lot pre-Katrina, like, I've stayed for this storm, that storm, this storm, and nothing happened. And so I think this was a statement to try to hit those people, like, hey, I know you've been here for Ivan, which churned, or you've been here for Hermine, or Isidore, all these other storms that have been close calls. This is not that storm. This is the big one. This is the one we're worried about. And the levee system was only designed for a Category 3 hurricane, and at the time, this was a Category 5. And so that was a real concern that the levees were going to fail because they just were not designed for this type of storm. So just to go back in time, and I hope Jeb has as I see it pulled up, this was one of the hits I did with Carl Arredondo this night 20 years ago during our coverage of WWL.
Brad Panovich in the Weather Center.
Yeah, Carl, we're really starting to see those winds pick up now that we're seeing these squalls and these rain bands move through the area. Conditions, probably in the last 20 minutes, we've seen winds go from about 20 sustained now up to 40. That's tropical storm force winds now that for an extended period of time. I think we're pretty much socked in now with those strong winds. Let's go to pinpoint Doppler radar, show you where the storms are right now. And we have some bands of heavier rain beginning to move back into the area. Just a side note, that box you see right there, that is actually the tornado watch, which is in effect till 2 o'clock in the morning. And because of the tornado watch, I'm going to keep a particular eye on these individual storms. This is where you get little spin-ups on the tips of these little storms as they rotate in from the east to the west. And we'll put this into motion. You can see the movement as these rain bands wrap into the region. Right now in the CBD, we're not seeing a lot of rain, few passing showers, but the winds are picking up, as Carl had mentioned. We'll head downriver through Plaquemines Parish, Myrtle Grove, some heavy rain, Point of Lahash down towards Port Sulphur. These areas down here are seeing winds close to 60 and 70 miles per hour already across this area. To kind of give you an indication of how strong those winds actually are, let's throw some of those winds up there for you. We're going to put what we call wind barbs on there, and I'll move this out real quickly and give you an idea. You can see the flow. We can actually tell that the center is right down in this region here. So it's moving to the north-northwest at about 11 miles per hour. We have very strong wind field here moving in across this region. So that's beginning to push the water. Everywhere you see these little barbs going like that, that's pushing water into eastern St. Bernard and Plaquemines Parish. And again, that water is going to come in through Lake Bourne into Lake Pontchartrain, and we're going to see that extremely heavy rain move into the region. I want to show you the 1 hour rainfall totals just to give you an idea of how much rain. Look at these totals down here closer to the eye wall. We're talking inch, 2 inches, 3 inches per hour. This is not over a couple hours. This is just in 1 hour, and we get several hours of this rainfall. You kind of get an idea of how much rain could fall. These are storm totals that we're showing you right now based on Doppler radar. Down there, Venice, we have about 6 inches of rain has fallen. Down near Grand Isle, 4 inches plus. But of course, out here in the Gulf, a couple of these green areas, you're looking at rainfall totals approaching 8 inches.
Let's check in on the Gulf Coast as the storm is going to have an impact.
Yeah, so Tim, that was evidence that I actually had hair at some point in my career, and also, man, I sounded like a baby back then. That was it's kind of weird to see that, but that was part of the reason I was actually impressed. Like the fact that I could pronounce all those things, I think was part of the reason they brought me back was because I was familiar with most of the parishes and towns, and it seemed like I had never left, even though it had been about 2.5 years.
That's part of the battle. Whenever you're someone, weather, news, whatever, you move to another part of the country, you have to learn how to say all the towns, even a different part of the state. You've got to figure that out. But that's a nice little time capsule there of the technology, of the fashion, of all of those intense, rain bands that start to move in, though. Yeah. And part of my question, just watching this, you said there were only 2 of you. Did you guys just do the storm the whole time, or did you take breaks at all?
So pretty much I had forgot. I did the morning show that morning, and then I think I might have taken a nap because up in the upstairs conference room they had put cots out, and it was like a dark room, and there was it felt like you were in like a barracks for like a military installation, and there was just people sleeping. You just go in there and take a nap, and then the GM's office had a shower and you could go shower. Yeah. So I think I took a nap in the middle of the day, but I came back down and we tag teamed pretty much the rest of the night, and I don't think I slept for like 48 hours because later that night we were going to stay at the station as long as we possibly could until the last minute, and then we got evacuated to the Hyatt Regency Superdome. And they called us over because they basically said, hey, if you guys don't get over here, we're locking the doors and we're not going to let you in. So we all ran over there. And what happened was half the station had evacuated to Baton Rouge, and we handed the coverage off to them out of LSU's journalism school, where they were broadcasting out of their college studio. That's what they were doing. And so we handed it off to them. And then I ended up spending most of my time, and now Jeb, you could bring up my laptop here. So if you watch the Netflix documentary, you'll see this. This is the Hyatt Regency ballroom. This is where I spent the storm. I was mostly in here with all these evacuees. There was, I think, about 5,000 people in this hotel. They weren't all guests. What happened was people who could not evacuate the city did vertical evacuation. They came to these high-rise hotels, and they went up as high as they could to get out of the water, but not too high to be in the wind. But they made us all go to this room, and we all just camped out on the floor. And then these were the images. I kept going outside. Obviously, as a meteorologist, I'm like running outside every couple minutes to see what it's like. The front of the building had the sandbags to kind of keep the water out. And then the storm hit while we were sleeping. I got up a couple times and went outside. The next morning, I'm going to show you quickly. I'm going to zoom through these. This is just some of the damage, but I want to show you the front of the hotel here in a second, because every window, I think, in the west-facing part of this hotel was damaged. That was my room, 15th floor. I wasn't up there. I went up there to get my luggage, which I thankfully put in the bathroom and shut the door. But that was the view out my window, which was broken, and that was the Superdome right there. We went back down the stairs. That was the elevators. There was water pouring down. I don't know if you can tell there, but water pouring down from the roof. We gathered all our stuff, and we ventured out. And when I turned around and looked at the building, and I'm going to show you that image here, coming into view right here, that's the Hyatt Regency in the middle, and you can see every window on that side of the building was gone. It was crazy. And one of the biggest hazards is getting back to the station, believe it or not. You couldn't go more than like 100 yards without getting a flat tire. There was just nails and glass everywhere. And so one of the photographers had a whole box of that Fix-It Flat stuff, and we were just pumping the tires up with what we had. And we actually went back to the station, Tim, in the French Quarter, and we got there. Every light was on. The air conditioning was running. It was fine because we had a generator. And like the whole time I'm thinking, why didn't we stay here? And I actually spent the night in the weather center the following night. Did not know the levees broke at this time. That's how crazy it was.
It's amazing. You know, it seems like Katrina actually moved a little bit more quickly than a lot of other hurricanes do. It kind of came in and got out. But hurricanes are the one weather event where there's a before and there's an after when they really hit. And you've just shown us the before and then the after. There's no pre-Katrina New Orleans anymore, just as if with Helene up in the mountains, there's a before and there's an after. And we'll see a lot more of that tomorrow on the special.
Yeah, and I'll leave you with one last picture here. So this was the next morning after I spent the night in the weather center. That water down on the street, which you can see, was the first time I noticed water, and I asked myself, where was that water coming from? And about 30 minutes later, we got the call that levees had broke. And I noticed that water, Tim, the next morning. I was like, where's this water coming from? Because it hadn't rained in like 24, 36 hours. I'm like, why is there water pouring down the street? And that was like the first sign to us that something had happened. So tomorrow, tune in. We're doing 2 hours of this. WWL is going to give us some coverage as well. And we're going to talk to John Gum, who was the meteorologist that I was going down to help replace because his wife was going into labor. His story's crazy in and of itself. He's trying to cover the storm, Tim. His wife gives birth 24 hours, and then he's got to evacuate a newborn and his wife during the middle of the storm. It's crazy.
Gosh. Looking forward to seeing that. Special.
All right, guys, stick around. Colin is coming up next with more Impact News, and stay tuned for that Katrina special tomorrow at 6:30.